Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Between the Pillars, the Fisher's video podcast series, where we get to meet some of the staff members here at Fisher. We get to look at some of the collections. And today, on Friday, November the 26th, we're going to be doing a special one. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the discovery of insulin, one of the great achievements in 20th century medicine. I'll be introducing my colleagues very shortly, Natalya Rattan and Alexandra Carter. Talk a little bit first about the actual year we've had in 2021 with respect to the discovery of insulin. As I said, it's the 100th anniversary, and it's being feted not just here at the University of Toronto with a number of online exhibitions, but it's really being celebrated worldwide. And we know it's being celebrated worldwide because we've had a lot of requests for a lot of the archival materials here at Fisher. And we're going to talk specifically about the archival materials. We're not scientists here at the Fisher Library, so we're not going to talk about the discovery of insulin itself in terms of the true science behind it. We're going to talk about the archival materials that we hold here at the Fisher that's related to the discovery and development of insulin. So with that, let's meet a little further. My two colleagues, Natalya Rattan, Alexandra Carter. Natalya is the archivist here at the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library, and Alexandra Carter is our librarian in charge of history of science collections and history of medicine collections. So the discovery of insulin fits nicely into both of those as well. So both of you, welcome. Thank you for joining us for celebrating the 100th anniversary of the discovery of insulin. And I should say that we actually had initially, pre-COVID times, we were going to have a physical exhibition that celebrated the discovery, but it was going to be running this fall, but unfortunately, something called COVID got in the way of that, and so we weren't able to do a proper physical exhibition. But what both Alex and Natalya have done, however, is create an online digital exhibition that celebrates the 100th anniversary. So we'll put the link to that in the little YouTube blurb that will go with this video. So please check that out. It's a great exhibition. So I want to start with you, Natalya, to talk about the actual archive itself. So obviously the names Banting and Best are pretty much synonymous with the discovery of insulin. So maybe you could talk about both of those men and also some of the other materials that we have that are related to the discovery of insulin.
Sure. So the Fisher's archives, I'd say most of the insulin archives are found within Frederick Banting's papers. But we also have material in Charles Best's collections, James Collip, and some J.J.R. Macleod. So they were essentially the team who isolated the hormone insulin in 1921. So the archives are quite large. I'd say we have about 50 meters of material. Out of that, let's say there's some 7,000 documents pertaining to the history and discovery of insulin. So there are things like handwritten notes, notebooks, charts, the charts and notebooks documenting experiments, which Alex will show a bit later on, as well as academic papers, research files, newspaper articles, correspondence, and patient files, like everything leading up to the discovery and everything that documents the various stages of the discovery would be found within the archives.
Do we know how it ended up in our department?
Yeah, so I've been learning a little bit more about these collections and how it all came here. So Banting's collection was the first to arrive to the library. It was collected by a committee concerned with Banting memorabilia, which was set up after his death in 1941. But we received his papers in about 1957.
Right.
And it would appear that they're papers that were in his office. So Charles Best's collection came in 1982, and they were transferred from his office in the Best Institute, which is no longer on campus anymore, much like the Banting Institute. Right. And among his papers were two boxes of files pertaining to Macleod, who was the head of the physiology department during the discovery of insulin. And Collip, lastly, So he's the scientist that's best known for purifying the extract. Some of his archives came to us in 1989 from his daughter, Dr. Barbara Collop. But I'd say the bulk of his archives are at the University of Alberta, where he was a professor, and the University of Western Ontario, where he was appointed the Dean of Medicine. But so I'd say our collections are mostly Banting and Best. Yeah, they're quite extensive.
I was going to say there's a real thoroughness about them. And for people that are actually interested in seeing not just what we're going to show today, there's actually a larger website, a larger repository of all this. I mean, because a lot of this material really has been digitized, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'd say everything relating to the discovery and documenting the stages is on our Insulin website.
Okay. So maybe Alex, maybe you could talk about as the librarian responsible for our history of science and history of medicine collections. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how this archive kind of fits into the larger to those larger two collections.
Yeah, I think when you think of the archives at the Fisher, we often focus on the literary archives and, sort of more the humanities side of things. But, we really do have a very large history of science and medicine collection. And it makes sense because you can sort of see the evolution of these sort of discoveries beginning very, very early on. Like, there's references to what we now understand as diabetes, in ancient, texts all the way up through the Middle Ages, through everything to the Renaissance. You can see examples of them mentioning, a disease they would call like the sugar sickness, or
right.
So they didn't, it's sort of a continuum, beginning as far back as basically as early as medicine began, up until present day. And I think at some point we had maybe a cutoff, like we don't collect things past 1900 or whatever. But that this is obviously a very significant discovery. It just happens to have occurred more recently, but it does fit in with our collections, and just being affiliated with U of T as well. It's also very important, I think, that it is in some institution like this where we can preserve it and have it here and preserve it, but also provide access to researchers so they can actually consult it.
Well, it certainly is one of the most accessed collections, as well as Natalya can attest to as well, especially since we've had so many requests over the past, oh my God, must be last 18 months leading up to the anniversary. So it's a very, very popular and important collection. So actually, Alex, maybe we can start the show and tell portion of this, because I know you pulled out some of the materials that relate specifically to the discovery.
Yeah, I tried to pull out some of the things that, they're the highlights from what we would have shown in exhibitions and online, and just sort of different examples of the different types of material that we have. Right. And I think what's really interesting to look at from a history of medicine perspective is, how records and how experiments were done in before computers, I guess, and this very sort of manual way. I often talk about how this discovery happened in this tiny little shoddy laboratory with just two guys and their notebooks, and so you can really see that in some of these things. So I'm going to show some of their laboratory notes. So we have here just a very rudimentary chart done by hand where they're tracking the blood glucose and urine glucose levels of dogs that they were testing, along with sort of more in-depth laboratory notes about the outcome of each test. We have it.
So these date back to May and June of 1921, if I can read correctly.
Yeah, that's right, 1921. So this would have been it's interesting. I'm going to talk about it with the notebooks. You can kind of see with the dates as they get closer and closer to the sort of breakthrough. But these are all, we don't have the complete archive, but we do have some of the most important periods for the discovery. So yeah, this is 1921. And this is the famous photos. So we also have photographs here.
What's the dog's name again?
So this is not Marjorie. So Marjorie was the famous dog that lived the longest after being given their pancreatic extract. Right. This is actually dog 408, which didn't have a name, but this picture was taken on the top of the medical sciences building. Right. But it's a quite famous photo, and we have all sorts of copies of it here. But so this is sort of the sort of laboratory conditions they were working under, literally just writing everything down with a pen. It was a very manual process. It was also, their charts are kind of very inconsistent. There's all sorts of different styles that they were using. So you really get the sense that it was kind of an ad hoc process.
Right.
Which was kind of neat. And just to see their handwriting and as they're really working through this. And then the notebooks here. Again, a way to really see their process and how it's was quite manual. So just these small little notebooks, all of them are quite tattered, and you can see they were using them in the lab. But more detailed notes about testing different. So at this stage, they, I believe, were they knew that they had isolated an extract, but they hadn't found one that was effective, that didn't cause infection, and that was like consistently effective. So this is working out the details of that. But you could even see all sorts of strange fluids on the pages, from the, I don't know what, blood, and it's a very interesting thing. When you think now that records are sort of just all online on a computer disk or something, this is the whole entirety of the research in these little notebooks.
Wow.
It's nice to see too. So this is actually, and I wanted to point to the collaborative nature. So we always talk about how, there was 4 or 5 different people involved, at least Banting and Best for sure at this stage. And they actually shared the notebooks. So they have 2 different hands, or sometimes 3 when their other colleague was helping.
Right.
So sharing the notebooks, sort of passing them back and forth and adding notes as they were taking turns working in the lab. Something I like too is just to see, I mentioned, as you get closer to the dates where things started to, they started to be promising, it's almost like you see that their handwriting change, and they start doing more frequent tests and more excited or something. But they also see these moments of sort of frustration with these things crossed out, where you can see, oh, maybe that test didn't go so well and was disappointing. And so these are the kind of things that I think don't really come out now in sort of modern, like giant big data projects. Like you have this personal side to the scientific process, maybe, and for medical testing. So we have a lot of the
now to be shoved into a supercomputer and that's it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and spits out a chart and everything. But yeah, this is almost like a diary as well. If you read through some of the more detailed entries where he's talking about the day, the whole course of the day, how it went in the lab and things. So you can really learn a lot from this, not just the medical data, really.
Right.
So just quickly too, we wanted to show something that's one of our most requested or inquired about items. So I think many people know or have heard the story that Banting gave the patent for insulin to the University of Toronto for $1 in the interest of, making it accessible to as many people as possible. And we know where that's gone now, but this is a lot of times, it's media or, just people who, don't quite believe it and they want to say, did that actually happen? This is actually just a typescript of the agreement set up at the university.
Oh, wow.
To give the patent to the university for $1.
Oh, wow.
Original document there, signed by Banting, Best, Collip. I think Macleod was supposed to be on there, but anyway, there we go. And then along those lines too, so this is just also to show that we do have a lot of legal documents to do with, how insulin was produced after it was, sorted out. So this is university for a long time was in charge, had the patent for Canada, US, and Britain. But we got to a point where we couldn't keep up with production and manufacturing levels.
Right.
So we started to at that point we started to have to find different routes for producing. So this is an application for a US patent and a sort of an agreement to work with the university to distribute and produce insulin in the United States. So another original sort of legal document in the collection. So we have lots of those as well.
There's no restrictions on this material, are there, in terms of usage and handling? Because I know there is one thing you did want to show that actually we actually have restricted only because of the fragility of it. Maybe you could just talk about that one item.
Yeah, so that was It's a frequently mentioned or cited moment where on October 31st, Banting supposedly, woke up in the middle of the night and had a sort of aha moment, light bulb moment, and wrote down just really quickly, like, ligate, the method that they would go on to use to try to isolate this particular cell in the pancreas. And so it's a very small little sheet of paper, but it's like very highly acidic, mid 20th century paper and a pen, and it's getting very faded and fragile. So we have, as I mentioned quickly, like, another part of our job is to preserve these materials.
Right.
So part of that is digitizing it. Part of it is sort of having to make these decisions sometimes where we didn't want to expose it to any extra light today, but it is digitized in very high resolution on our Insulin sites, if you'd like to see that, because it is very neat. He doesn't.
We will definitely include a link to that in the show notes. So, okay, this is great. So maybe actually we can go back to Natalya then as well, because now that we've seen the actual discovery itself instead of the archival documents related to it, let's talk about some of the success stories then in terms of what it's meant for those that were suffering with diabetes. And we have quite a lot of material in the archive that's related to that. Isn't that right, Natalya?
We do. So one of my favorite parts about the discovery, and I think a lot of people would agree, is the patient stories, or kind of the patient narratives found within the archives. So Alex is just helping me out here with the document camera. So this photograph here is Leonard Thompson.
Right.
Leonard Thompson was the first diabetic patient to receive injections of the extract. Earlier this year, there was a Heritage Minute, I don't know if you saw it, that Historica Canada created. And it told the story of Leonard Thompson and how he was part of the first clinical trials done on patients with insulin.
Right.
So we often get requests to use Leonard Thompson material, but we don't have very much within our collection. We have this photograph and we have a published journal, but his patient records would be at the Toronto General Hospital.
Okay.
But I find this story very inspiring, and I suggest you watch the Heritage Minute as well.
When one of the other patients too that we often hear about is Teddy Ryder.
Oh yes, so Alex is going to set that out. So yeah, so Teddy Ryder was another one of Banting's first patients, and he actually also was his last surviving insulin patient.
Right.
So he was born in New Jersey, and he came to Toronto for treatment. So he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 4, and by the age of 6, when he arrived to Toronto, so that image to the left, he was only 27 pounds,
right,
due to the starvation diet he was put on to maintain healthy levels of his blood sugar. So initially he was refused, but his uncle, Dr. Morton Ryder, reached out to Banting to be included in the trials and insisted that Teddy's condition was dire and he couldn't wait. So Banting agreed to treat him.
Right.
On the other image, so where he's on that tricycle, that's after his insulin treatments. They were obviously successful and he gained weight and was able to return home. So within Banting's papers, there are letters, charts, and these types of photographs relating to his progress and the success of his insulin trial. And the next item I want to show is a letter, one of our favorite letters from the collection. So Teddy and Dr. Banting kept in touch up until Banting's death in 1941.
Right.
So this letter on display is I'd say one of the highlights in our collection. So in an excerpt in the letter, it says, so he's returned home after receiving insulin, and he's telling Banting, "I wish you could come to see me. I'm a fat boy now and I feel fine. I can climb a tree." Like it's lovely.
Right.
So Teddy Ryder lived for over 70 years on insulin.
Right.
So he was definitely one of Banting's success stories. And it's interesting. I like seeing his early letters to Banting and Banting's responses and all of the photographs. It's a nice story.
And it kind of drives home that the archive is not just about the science itself, it's about the people.
Of course, yes,
Mm.
and all of the patients.
Mhm.
So the next thing I want to show is also from Banting's papers, and it's in regards to Elizabeth Hughes. So
Right.
Elizabeth Hughes was another one of Banting's greatest success stories. She lived until she was 73, having lived on insulin for 58 years.
Right.
So she was the daughter of the US Secretary of State at the time. So her insulin trial received considerable press coverage,
Right.
which I think I have a copy of an article on my next image. Yes, so there you can see a newspaper clipping kind of discussing her insulin trial. So right below the newspaper clipping is a chart found in Banting's collection, which documents Elizabeth Hughes' health and her diet from August 16th, which is when she first received her first injection of insulin.
Right.
And these charts basically go to her departure from Toronto on November 30th.
Mhm.
And they document, as you can see, like blood, sugar, urine, all of that. So during that time, her weight increased from 45 to 75 pounds, and her average calorie intake also doubled, which shows like how healthy she was.
Mhm.
I don't know.
It's a pretty amazing document actually, because it shows, I like the fact it shows what she's eating, her diets. So I mean, obviously she was very invested in her own recovery at the same time.
Oh yes. Did I mention that is in her hand?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that Elizabeth Hughes kept these meticulous records and sent
Mhm.
them to Banting.
Mhm.
It's amazing to have a record of this within the papers, I'd say.
Right.
And right above that chart is a letter. So another kind of patient letter to Banting in which she documents her physical health and requests more insulin.
Right.
So also, I just wanted to mention about Elizabeth Hughes is that the Fisher also holds a series of letters written by her to her mother, both before and after her insulin treatment by Banting. And I feel like those letters are like document or provide an interesting account of her life as a diabetic at the time,
Right.
and document the return of her health after receiving insulin. So
Amazing.
also on the insulin site.
Mm.
So the next things I think Alex is going to bring out here are from Banting's gigantic scrapbooks, which we've also digitized on the insulin site, but on the insulin site, you can't tell how large these scrapbooks are.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They're huge and they weigh about 40 pounds each.
So was he doing the scrapbooking himself then of this material? Do you know?
From what I've read, he put these scrapbooks together with assistance from his assistant, Sadie Gairns.
Okay.
We also have some of her archives as well.
Okay.
So this letter here, I mean, I really like this letter. I think we'll only be able to see the front because the back is on the other side of the.
Okay.
So again, it's another letter from one of Banting's early patients, Meyer Blaustein, who also experienced a quick recovery upon receiving insulin injections. So I like this letter because she's reporting on her general health, but also telling Banting, the same day you left, I gathered some nerve together and gave myself the insulin, and I've been doing it ever since. I've been sugar-free for the last 5 days and getting about 1,900 calories. I'm feeling great and getting insulin only twice a day. So I liked that his patients kept in touch. And I mean, I don't know how normal this is now, but I really enjoy these stories within the archives.
What else is in those scrapbooks as well? So it's basically just any kind of scrapbooking, whatever other people do, scrapbooks, photographs, newspaper articles, things like that.
Oh yeah, there's photographs, there's newspaper clippings, there's letters. So I think we just have to zoom out a little bit. We can only see her legs. And so I mean, there's a photograph of Banting to the left. You can see half of him. But this photograph that we're focusing on right now is Elsie Needham,
Right.
So below it is an annotation that Banting wrote, where he says, Elsie Needham in October 1922, she entered hospital for sick children in diabetic coma. So she was the first child to recover from coma by the use of insulin, which again, you know, prior to the discovery of insulin, diabetics who lapsed into a coma usually died. So it's also an interesting story.
Well, you can tell too. Obviously, I mean that they won the Nobel for this discovery, but I mean you can tell by the fact he's keeping these letters. There's real pride in the work he's done in terms of what it's actually, you know, in terms of how it saved so many individuals.
Of course, and I mean, it seems like he developed friendships with his patients, and I liked that they kept him updated on their progress.
Right.
I find that fascinating. So this is lastly, we wanted to show a piece of ephemera.
Right.
We really enjoyed this. So this is again, in one of Banting's scrapbooks. And I think it's amazing that it got to him from Saskatchewan. Like Alex says, it's like people addressing letters to Santa Claus.
Right.
So like around this time, so many letters were sent to Banting in 1922 and 1923. From patients all around the world requesting insulin and thanking him for his discovery.
Right.
So I just find, like it says, to the doctor who cures diabetes. Yeah, we really like this piece of ephemera, and I like that he kept it as
It's
well.
amazing. It's amazing how it found its way to him.
Mm-hmm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, haven't a lot of some of this material being used in they just didn't release some commemorative stamps, I think, this year for discovery of insulin?
Yes, so Canada Post released a commemorative stamp, and for the actual stamp, they used an excerpt from Banting's memoir or his account of the discovery,
Right.
alongside an insulin bottle. And these stamps come in a package, and the packet is decorated with these envelopes,
Right.
that were addressed to Banting. So
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can just come back on screen just to kind of, right, this has been great. I mean, and what we're seeing here is just a small sampling, obviously, of what's in the archive. And maybe one of you can talk about, I mean, how is this archive being used over the years? Obviously, leading up to the 100th anniversary, there's been a lot of celebrations. Michael Bliss, of course, wrote one of the most famous books about the discovery of insulin. But as we said before, this is still one of the most heavily accessed collections, not just by research too, but maybe you could talk about some of the people that have had diabetes that have actually come to look at the collections as well.
Yeah, so I mean, diabetic patients and doctors even come and, you know, look at the collections here in person. And I feel like it's quite a moving experience for them to come and see these documents in person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's amazing that they exist, I think, and that so much is documented and that they can read these stories within the archives. But of course, the collection is used for so many different things.
Right.
I mean, I feel like I get at least 3 emails a week, so
right,
about insulin. So there's countless articles, TV, like news segments.
Right.
It's appeared in some TV shows.
Right.
I think there are some documentaries. I know there's going to be a Banting documentary.
Right.
I don't know, Alex, what do you? Anything?
Yeah, in terms of people consulting it, yeah, it's often like honestly just that one fact, because it seems so unbelievable now that what the cost of insulin is like, that it started out so that at $1, so or with Banting basically giving it away. So a lot of people want to confirm that. And then in my teaching, I usually have history of medicine students, where I have, you know, doctors come in, and they, from my side of it, like the material that I was showing, they're really quite blown away by, yeah, the method that was or lack thereof that was used to discover this, to make this huge discovery. So you know, a lot of it is serious research, but some of it is people who just are you know, they have a personal connection to the story, whether that's because they have diabetes themselves, or they're doctors who've treated patients. And so I think it's important to sort of keep that story of it alive in that way.
And as I do like to remind people, as I said, we do have a couple of digital exhibition sites where they can look at all this material themselves online. So, or come to the library, since we are open again to researchers to look at that material. So again, thank you both for this celebration of the 100th anniversary. We definitely had to do something to honor it, since we unfortunately couldn't have the physical exhibition. But it's great you at least whetted our appetite in terms of some of the material that is related to the discovery of and development of insulin. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have the last Between the Pillars episode of 2021 coming up in 2 weeks. And we're going to be again looking at some 20th century material as well, related to our Kenny collection, which is the history of socialism, history of communism, and workers' rights here in Canada and worldwide. So that's going to be quite an interesting exploration of that material. So again, thank you both. And I will see everybody in 2 weeks, and have a great weekend.
Bye.